All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning to those of you online, and welcome to the second day of our Green Ribbon Science Panel meeting. Again, I'm Alejandro Vivas, and I'm from DTSC's Office of Environmental Equity. On behalf of the department, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to be here again today. Those of you that were with us yesterday, we had a lot of great discussions. Welcome back. And those of you that are joining us just today, looking forward to engaging in some good discussions with you all. I'd also like to take this moment to announce that those that are, in addition to those that are with us here today, we have the public tuning in to today's webcast, and my colleague Elsa Lopez will be assisting with the monitoring of the Zoom platform. So if you're watching the discussion via webcast and you'd like to provide input, please email your questions and comments to Safer Consumer Products, all one word, at dtsc.ca.gov. Again, that's Safer Consumer Products, one word, at dtsc.ca.gov. If you wish to provide oral public comments using the Zoom platform, please register as an attendee at the link provided at the DTSC GRSP 2023 meeting website. In addition, you can enable the transcript function on the Zoom platform while attending this meeting. Of course, today's meeting is going to be recorded, and we will be posting it to DTSC's public website once it's made available to the department. Now, a couple of quick announcements, one being an evacuation announcement. Those of you in the room, please look around and identify the two exits here to the left and in the back of the room. Hopefully, we don't need to evacuate, but if we do, please take your valuables with you. Our staff will work to guide you to the next nearest exit. And I'd also like to point out that we have signs on the ceiling, big green exit sign that'll help you guide to leave quickly. Once you exit the room, please do not use the elevators. Instead, please exit down their stairway. If we need to leave the building entirely, please head towards the relocation site across the street at Cesar Chavez Plaza Park. Excuse me. A quick housekeeping announcement. We have the nearest restrooms located in the hallway outside this meeting room. The women's restroom is located at the end of either hallway, and the men's restroom is located just outside this room. If you need a quick drink of water, the nearest water fountain is located next to the women's restroom, and of course, we've got some refreshments and coffee in the back of the room. As far as public comments, we will be providing an opportunity for public comment later this morning. We ask that anyone who's interested in providing a public comment, please raise their hand or turn in your public comment card. They're in the back of the room there at the desk. Please let me know if you have any trouble finding them. We can get one of those to you. For those tuning in remotely, you may email your comment to Safer Consumer Products at dtsc.ca.gov. Again, that's one word, Safer Consumer Products at dtsc.ca.gov. And that comment will be read aloud. If you wish to provide an oral public comment by using the Zoom platform for this meeting, please again register as an attendee at the link provided at the DTSC GRSP meeting website. And finally, we have our Bagley-Keene reminder. I want to announce that all attendees today at the Green Ribbon Science Panel meeting are subject to the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act to preserve the public transparency of the panel's discussion and decisions. I will now turn it over to the co-chairs of the GRSP for opening remarks.
Hi, I'm Kelly Moran. I'm a co-chair of the Green Ribbon Science Panel. And is the audio working okay for folks here? Good. So we'll start the meeting with a couple opening remarks from the staff team. Then I'd like to add a little roll call, so to make sure that our online attendees and everyone's mics are working. And then we can move into the presentation from Dr. Grant. So.
Thank you, Kelly. Good morning, everyone. I'm still basking in the glow from yesterday's meeting, which was really, I'm trying to capture the word awesome, but great word. But I think yesterday was a reminder of a lot of things, but one of them is that the real benefit of having such great minds and leaders and committed people on this panel that have helped us for a long time. And it was really gratifying to hear from all of you. I think today is exciting because we're going to hear from Kelly about our regulatory response proposal for spray polyurethane foam systems containing MDI. And this is really important time for us because will be the first time we've gone to the fourth and final phase of the regulations. And it's a journey we're really happy to be on. And it's really a good time to hear from you because we're in the midst of a public comment period for our proposal. And one thing I want to remind folks is that we put out a proposal based on the regulations and the goals and mission we have, but we haven't done it before. So we really need to hear from people. And I'm saying this in part for those listening online and the public to please engage with us because we really need input to be well informed to make the best decisions possible. And so it's a really great time to hear from all of you. And again, thank you for all your help on our journey and look forward to today.
Meredith, do you want to add anything before we? Okay, so I'll just acknowledge Dr. Williams is here in the room with us. Let's do a roll call and then I'll do a brief agenda review and then we'll move to Dr. Grant. Just if you'd state your name and affiliation for the record.
Suzanne Bander, Oregon State University.
Ann Blake, Environmental and Public Health Consulting and the Jennifer Altman Foundation.
Mike Carangelo, SC Johnson.
Molly Jacobs, Director of Applied Research at University of Massachusetts Lowell. Good morning, everyone.
And Kelly Moran, San Francisco West Area Institute.
Helen Holder, retired from HP.
Lane Cohen-Hubble, US EPA.
Julie Shannon, Texas A&M University.
And online, I think Emma and Jack, I hope you're both there.
Yes, good morning. Emma Lavoie, US EPA.
And Jack Leinard, consultant to the personal care industry.
Yay, everyone works. So thank you very much. I'm glad that everyone's who's here has been able to attend today. So today we'll begin with a presentation from Dr. Grant, and then we'll move into a public comment period, after which we'll spend our time discussing the regulatory response for polyurethane foam systems with unreacted methylene diphenyl diisocyanate, SPF systems, also known as SPF systems. And importantly, this discussion is around the precedent setting and some of the questions here. So even though it's around a specific example that's out for public comment, as Carl mentioned, they're really looking to think through the process here. So we should think more broadly than just this one thing. And that's why it's important that this group advise the department on this, is help them think it through. Dr. Kelly Grant, Senior Environmental Scientist, will kick off that discussion outlining proposed regulatory responses by DTSC. And we'll follow the presentation and after the public comment period with significant time for panel discussion on regulatory responses. You'll see that there's 2 segments to that, one before the break and one after the break. So with that, Dr. Grant, I think we're ready. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Good morning. And first off, I want to start by acknowledging all the support from the GRSP. I've talked to a number of you. The team has talked to a number of you in helping to put these regulatory responses together. So thank you for that. So today we're going to discuss the proposed regulatory responses for the manufacturers of spray polyurethane foam systems containing unreacted methylene diphenyl diisocyanate. And as Kelly alluded to, that's quite a mouthful. So we'll use the term SPF systems. And there are 3 regulatory responses that we've proposed, and I'll go through these in more detail throughout the presentation. So before we go any further, I want to ensure that we're all on the same page in regard to the priority product, SPF systems. These are 2-component liquid systems. The A side contains the methylene diphenyl diisocyanate, or MDI, which is the chemical of concern and the reason that SPF systems are listed as a priority product. The B side contains a mixture of polyols, catalysts, blowing agents, flame retardants, and surfactants. When the A and B sides are mixed together, they react to form the spray polyurethane foam, which acts as an insulation, that can be used for roofing. And as shown in this image, it's really important for filling gaps and voids. And so it's very important for the energy efficiency of buildings. And importantly, once this foam has cured, there's no longer a concern for exposure to MDI. MDI is highly reactive and will dissipate out of the system quite quickly. So the priority product definition includes 4 types of foam. There are 3 types of high pressure foam systems that are used by professionals, and these just have different densities. The highest density foam can be used on roofs and exteriors, where the other 2 are used inside. There's also low pressure foam, and this is often used by DIYers as well as workers doing small weatherization jobs or even touch-ups for larger professional installations. So now that you understand the priority product, I want to discuss how this product has moved through the SEP process. And that process starts with the candidate chemical list. And MDI is included on the candidate chemical list because it's a potent sensitizer. So the potential adverse impacts from exposure to MDI include asthma and other allergic responses in the lungs and respiratory tract. Allergic responses can also occur in the skin as well. And because those allergic responses are mediated by the immune system, that's considered another form of toxicity. So in 2018, SPF systems were officially adopted as a priority product because they met the 2 criteria required for a priority product listing. And those are that there's potential exposure to MDI from the product, and that exposure has the potential to contribute to or cause significant or widespread impacts. And the primary concern for this priority product is primarily for workers who face potential exposures throughout the entire workday and may develop asthma or similar conditions in the lungs. In the 3rd step of the SEP process, manufacturers complete an alternatives analysis, or AA. In the case where in the case where responsible entities or the manufacturers of the priority product screen alternatives and do not identify any feasible alternatives, they can also do an economic analysis and provide greater detail on the performance parameters of the product. And that's what we call an abridged AA. The abridged AA automatically triggers 2 regulatory responses, where the responsible entities are required to provide information to consumers and to advance green chemistry and green engineering through research and development of safer products. So I just want to give you an overview of the SPF Systems Abridged Alternatives Analysis Report. The initial report received public comments, and the REs addressed those as well as comments from SEP to make the report more complete. The responsible entities evaluated several types of alternatives, including broader insulation types, but those were described as outside the scope of the AA. They also evaluated sprayable reactive insulations that do not contain MDI. And unfortunately, there was little information on either the performance or all the ingredients in those other formulations. Lastly, they evaluated alternatives that may reduce exposure to MDI. And there, the options were somewhat limited. There were some types of systems that can reduce exposure using plastic sheeting. In other cases, there was a nozzle that was helps to reduce exposure to MDI, but it's not portable, which would be needed for these spray foam insulation. And so in conclusion, the responsible entities found that these alternatives neither to be functionally acceptable nor technically or economically feasible. So the fourth step of our process is regulatory response, and DTSC has a number of possible options for the regulatory response to reduce or eliminate the adverse impacts from the priority product. And those include a variety of options. So we have one that we call a pre-reg response, where we can require the generation of additional data to inform the reg response. We can also require the manufacturers or responsible entities to provide information to consumers. We can impose use restrictions on chemicals and products. We can implement a sales prohibition. We can require engineered safety measures or administrative controls, or require end-of-life management for hazardous waste. And we can advance green chemistry and green engineering research. So guidance on selecting the regulatory responses comes from our regulations, specifically from the section 69506. And their preference is given to regulatory responses that provide the greatest level of inherent protection. And these selection principles are binned into three categories. The first is public health and environmental protection. And that includes the degree to which the regulatory responses address the adverse impacts from the priority product, the responsible entity's ability to act on the regulatory response, and both intended and unintended impacts on sensitive subpopulations. The next category includes the economic interests of the responsible entity. And we can consider conflicting regulations on the chemical of concern, the comparative cost of the regulatory response compared to other regulatory responses, I should say, and the practical capacity of the responsible entity to comply. The final category of selection principles looks at government efficiency and cost containment. And this includes the relative cost of the reg response to the cleanup costs, the administrative burden, and the ease of enforcement. So as I already mentioned, when manufacturers complete an abridged AA, they have to complete these two reg responses, and I'll talk about these in the subsequent slides. So one of these regulatory responses is to provide information to consumers and users in California. And the goal of this is to provide users with safety information before they purchase the product so that they can make informed decisions. This information will help to promote the safe use and disposal of the product. And it will help users understand the hazards of the product and how to prevent exposures and regrettable situations, as you can see in this picture, where the user does not have appropriate PPE or personal protective equipment. So we divided this regulatory response into information that both high and low pressure systems must include, and then a specific category for just low pressure systems. This information here goes for both systems. And this basically just says that either on the label or on a nozzle cover, there has to be information directing users to take safety training before opening the product. That needs to contain an easily accessible link to the training, like a QR code. There needs to be a graphic of the required personal protective equipment and instructions for safe disposal. For low pressure systems, which again is often used by DIYers or for small jobs, we wanted to have a little more information provided. And so we'd like a quick set of instructions we referred to as a quick start guide that has very limited text and focuses on images. So for example, the package or the instructions would have images of PPE as shown up here. There would be a statement that said this product can cause asthma and allergic reactions. Protect yourself by properly using the personal protective equipment as required by the manufacturer's instructions. Instructions would be provided in Spanish as well. And there's more to this, but just for brevity of the slide and presentation, I didn't go into all those. You can read more about that in the notice of proposed determination. So the next required regulatory response is the advancement of green chemistry and green engineering. And this has probably been one of the more challenging regulatory responses to design because of really the limited information in the regulations. And this is only slightly abbreviated from, sorry, I'm pointing at the slide for those remote. This is only slightly abbreviated from what the regulations say. And I'll just read it so everyone can has access, but the regulations state, when a manufacturer concludes that no safer alternative to its priority product is functionally acceptable, technically feasible, and economically feasible, the department may require the manufacturer to initiate a research and development project or fund a challenge grant pertinent to the priority product that uses green chemistry and or engineering principles to do one or more of the following: to design a safer alternative, to improve the performance of a safer alternative, to decrease the cost of the safer alternative, or to increase the market penetration of a safer alternative to the priority product. So the notice of proposed determination provides a lot more details on this, but I wanted to hit a few key points. So our proposal will require the REs to collectively pay $8 million into the Green Chemistry Innovation Fund. This Green Chemistry Innovation Fund will be used to fund research and development projects proposed by both academics and industry. It will be administered by a third party. We'll have an independent panel of review experts that will select about 5 to 6 proposals for funding. And those proposals or those grants would last 2 to 3 years, depending on the proposal. And one of the reasons we chose this is because we feel this is sufficient to fund high caliber proposals. It will attract those high quality researchers to submit those proposals. And one of the things we heard from the experts that we consulted with is that it's really important that we fund multiple proposals to have the best chance at developing a safer alternative. So how did we come up with $8 million? So as noted in the regulations and supporting documents, the investment should be greater than the second stage of a 2-stage AA. And with 13 responsible entities, that's about $1.95 million. And that's really not sufficient for R&D for 4 distinct products. So as the regulations intend, the alternatives analysis is supposed to lay out the information upon which DTSC can make decisions about the regulatory response. So this $8 million figure is largely based on information in the abridged AA report. So the abridged AA makes it very clear there are 4 distinct products. They provide a figure for research and development costs. They provided a range. $2 million was kind of in the middle of the range, maybe a little bit on the higher end. And so we just multiplied by 4. And so we got to 8 million. And this is spelled out in more detail in the Investment in Green Chemistry Innovation Fund for SPF Systems document that is linked here. Also really critical, and I've already alluded to this, is that we consulted with a lot of experts to develop this figure, and this was sort of in the range that we heard from the experts that we talked to, experts in green chemistry, green engineering, policy, polyurethane experts, and non-isocyanate polyurethane experts. So we did talk to consult with a really wonderful group of people. So we put forth criteria which all the research and proposals would need to meet. And those include the scientific merit, the applicability to spray foam systems, achievability within the period of the research, the risk to reward ratio, the potential degree and speed with which the adverse impacts to workers could be eliminated or reduced, and potential for and proximity to commercialization, and the extent to which green chemistry and engineering principles are used. So the final regulatory response is the use restriction, and this restricts who may purchase or use the product. The REs are, the responsible entities, are required to develop and institute a mandatory training program and ensure that all users to SPF systems have successfully completed requisite training before the sale of the product. The REs are strongly encouraged to subsidize the training for workers, and professional users are required to take very rigorous safety training. And for example, the Spray Polyurethane Foam Alliance has a rigorous training program that meets these performance requirements. And so it would need to be that training or equivalent rigor. The low pressure foam system users may take a free online training, and the Center for Polyurethanes industry training meets the minimum requirements for that system. So in order to ensure that we are having the desired effect, we are requiring, the manufacturers to submit an annual report. And that will include the number of new trainees, renewing trainees, and trainees who have moved up to higher level of licensure, as well as the total SPF workers in California, with estimates of new and continuing members of the workforce. The report may also include details about incentive programs for workers to take the training and the efficacy of those incentives. And there may also be details of outreach to distributors and employers to verify training status. So the next steps in this process involve synthesizing your comments as well as the public comments. And then we're going to revise this notice of what we call Notice of Proposed Determination, NOPD, to determine the final regulatory responses. There is no firm timeline established by the regulations. And so in consultation with all of you and various other stakeholders, we will issue a notice of final determination with agreement with the responsible entities on implementation of those. And that final notice of final determination will include deadlines to implement these regulatory responses And I've committed our team to providing a summary response to comments in there. And so with that, thank you again. And I think we might go, well, back to Kelly.
So clarifying questions first, then we'll go to the public comment period. If you are online and wanting to make a public comment and you want to do it by email, I'd start typing now. Otherwise, the public participation specialist will be coming back up to facilitate the actual public comment period. But first, we have an opportunity for clarifying questions from members of the panel. And I will use the usual card system, and Mike, you're up, and then Elaine. I see a question from the audience, and I'm not exactly sure how we're handling that, and need some guidance from staff. Because normally we would have questions during the public comment period, but there's not a direct ability to respond.
Well, we can
Okay.
take the question in the comment period.
Okay.
And address it as appropriate.
Okay, so right now we're doing clarifying questions from the panel, then we'll go to the public comment period. So Mike, you're first.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Kelly. That was well done. And I've got some other questions that I think fall more into the discussion area, so I'll avoid those. With the annual reports that you were just talking about, are those coming in to the program? And then how are you staffing to receive? What are you doing with those annual reports? Do you feed it back to the licensure boards, or how is that information being utilized?
I'm not sure I've thought that part out, but I mean, I think part of it is to really verify the efficacy of the reg response. So evaluating, are we seeing an uptick in training or an uptick in the number of distributors who are verifying training before selling the product? That was my goal. Carl?
Well, I'll just add, so as Kelly said, part of it is just assessing the performance, but there's also a regulatory component, which is we're going to expect the responsible entities to actually do this work. And this is one way to get information over they're actually doing it. And if they're not, then we would take a different path for compliance.
So that is coming in through the program here with the staffing that you would have. It's the same team that's currently working, or?
Yeah, so part of our build out and the resources it received were with the construct that we didn't have resources to do this work. And so we've been sort of juggling it. Now under Jen Jackson's leadership and the team and Kelly's lead on this, we have dedicated staff to do this work.
Thank you.
Elaine, you're up.
Thank you. So having not followed along closely enough, can you tell me the options technically in the abbreviated AA that you received? There are options that are ripe for development, or there just sort of wasn't much on the horizon?
Well, I think that's a good question. I mean, the construct of our regulations puts the burden on the responsible entities to do the AA, and they have most of the information in terms of R&D that's gone on. So we only know what they told us in some sense. But I think that, as Kelly summarized, their position was there wasn't much ripe for alternatives, and that the other alternatives that are not within their capability, also they sort of don't meet the functional requirements that fully meet the performance of SPF systems. So
That's helpful.
And I will just add, there are some possible alternatives out there, but they have not been commercialized. And so it's very difficult to find any information on them if there is no company no longer supporting them. So I believe there was a EPA, either green chemistry winner or SBIR, small business innovative research grant recipient. And the company exists. We reached out to them, we never heard anything. So it's really hard to follow up on those sorts of alternatives and whether they are viable.
Other questions for staff? Suzanne, go ahead.
Yeah, I may have missed it, but I'm wondering if environmental impacts were considered at all. Understandably, the human health impacts are concerning, but polyurethane breaks down into microplastics. And so just, I know that's always a thing, but just wanted to check to see if that was considered.
Well, yes, I mean, I think we considered a lot of things. The focus was on MDI and the worker exposure. We considered also, I mean, you can look at the B side of this product and there potentially could be some concerns there. That was not our focus. But also end of life and considerations of what happens at end of life. But again, our primary focus was the worker impacts.
So just to clarify, I think, Carl, what you said is we listed MDI. We didn't list the A and B, both sides and the whole product.
We chose MDI, which is on the part A side. There are a variety of chemicals in these products. Some might be of concern, but our focus was on MDI.
Other questions? I have a few if nobody else does. So I'm going to ask a couple questions here, so this might take a minute. I'm wondering if you could please walk us through again. I'm trying to understand how the requirement for users to have safety training before purchase works exactly, how particularly for a product available at retail. And can you walk us through that a little bit, please?
Well, I think the construct that's important right now is we don't have the answers to all that. We're expecting the manufacturers to give us the proposal of how they're going to do that. So your point's a good one. And there's a line between the high pressure stuff, which is a different channel and supply and end user than the low pressure. So our concerns are lesser with the low pressure because of the nature of the product. And so that's more of an information stuff that they can get and will have to be point of sale type of information. There won't be there's no way to require that they necessarily do all of that. That's very different from the professional use where we're saying, look, there's a really good industry standard out there for training and you need to demonstrate you're selling it to people who have that certification.
So let me make sure I understand. I think what I just heard was that the training before purchase requirement applies to the professional users using the high pressure products. And the training before purchase requirement does not apply to the low pressure products. I thought I'd understood it did, so I'm a little confused.
I think, and Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, what we're saying is that the information needs to be provided for the retail for the low pressure at the point of sale, and that we're not requiring that they demonstrate, if you go into your hardware store and buy the low pressure stuff, you're not going to have to certify that you've taken that training on the label. Okay.
But it'll be out on the open shelf, so it won't be locked up like, for example, a spray can. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think that's something we can explore. I mean, again, this is our initial proposal. And the other thing I would say is this is why we're looking for comment, both on terms of what our proposal is and how we might change it. And an important part of that is on the very practical side. How is this going to work? Okay. Right. And so it's a very good question. And
okay. I'm being Tim Malloy and moving into it, so I wasn't trying to do that.
But I think you raise a good point. So like, if you go to your Ace Hardware and you want to buy in California, you want to buy spray paint, there are restrictions of, who can buy that. And so that's certainly potentially on the table.
Okay. And for the low pressure product available at retail, there's no differentiation between the home user and the person who's using it for work who buys it at retail, for example, the plumber or electrician or.
Yeah, I think it would just be, whoever goes into a hardware store has the option to purchase those products. Certainly, we would like the labeling requirements to really push people to take that training before they use the product. It does get complicated before the purchase. And that's something that, Carl has said, what we would like comment on so that we can figure out the most effective way to make sure those folks get trained.
Yeah, I recognize that the retail question is complicated, so we can talk about that more during the discussion. I also did want to understand the process here. You mentioned something about the manufacturers making a proposal. So how does that play into this, because I saw this and saw that it seemed to be final. So I'm just wondering how this actually works.
Yeah, that's a good question. So as Kelly highlighted, the regulations they're very simplistic in some sense. And so we put out a proposal. Ultimately, what we're planning on doing is hopefully entering consent agreements with the manufacturers. If that doesn't work, we will issue orders for implementation. And so there's going to be dialogue before we finalize the actual regulatory response requirement with the manufacturers so that we can get their input and hopefully come to an agreement that will be, safe and effective and impractical. So we assume that we're going to need some more information for them before we finalize the actual regulatory response.
Okay, and that among that information would be many more details about the implementation of these very general things.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Let's see. I'm trying to figure out if there's any of my other questions that I really need to ask now, but maybe I don't. So maybe we should move on to the public comment period at last. And thank you for your patience, Alejandro.
Of course, no, all these questions are wonderful. It's a good discussion. So as you said, we're going to move on to the public comment period. Just again, quick outline for those of you not in the room. Let's see here. So in the room, we have the comment cards, of course, in the back, if anyone would like to make a comment. If you are online and you'd like to submit your comments, please do so at Safer Consumer Products, one word, at dtsc.ca.gov, or you can make an oral comment via Zoom. The way to do that is to raise your hand using the Zoom feature, the function in Zoom. If you're calling in, please dial *9 to raise your hand and then *6 to unmute. Please turn off your webcast if you're speaking via Zoom to avoid feedback. That is pretty important. Of course, those of you in the room as well. I think everybody's Zoom is turned off. So first, does anybody in the room have any comments? No? Is there?
So I actually have some clarifying questions. I want to make sure I understand the presentation correctly. So the first one is about the timing. So so this SPF system was first listed as priority product in 2018, and then there's I guess goes through the preliminary AA, and then you have the abridged AA. So now we're finally at the stage 4, the regulatory response. So I just want to understand, it takes about 5 years to come to the end, and even it's a bridge AA, so supposedly it's even quicker than if you have a 2-stage AA. Is that correct?
Oh, actually, excuse me, I should have clarified that during the public comment period, we are not allowed to answer questions. So we're going to go ahead and table that, and we can use that in our discussions later on down the road.
Alejandro, I think I can answer this question because it's really just a process
Wonderful.
question.
Okay.
Is that yeah, one thing you left out is that during this process we were sued by the responsible entities, and so that put a stay on this process for a couple of years essentially. And so now that we've prevailed in the lawsuit and we were supported in what we're doing, we're moving forward. So but yes, the bridged AA process is shorter than the full AA process.
Thank you. So my second question is also a clarifying question. I was trying to understand, there was a part of the slides trying to like the support for 8 million proposed funding for the green chemistry, green engineering. So there was a cost of each AA report. It was 150,000. I just wonder what that means. Is it for something in the AA, or is the cost for the manufacturer to prepare the AA, or I'm not sure what that is. And also, it also mentioned there are 4 alternatives. I suppose those are identified 4 safer alternatives in the AA. I just want to make sure I understand it correctly.
Sure, I can address those. We have to estimate the amount of money it takes to complete an AA. And so I think our estimate is somewhere around $300,000 to complete an AA. The second stage would be about $150,000 to potentially complete that. That's I think our high end estimate. So that's where that number came from. In regards to the 4 alternatives, the manufacturers say that there are 4 distinct products. So the low pressure foam and the 3 different densities of the high pressure foam. So that's where the number 4 comes in.
Okay, thank you. So my last question is that I also noticed that it says some of the, so in the AA, the manufacturer said that some of the alternatives are outside the scope of AA. I think there was one slide said some, so I want to know what does that mean? Because like for example, I was reading the technical document about the tires with 6 ppd. So there are different like, I guess, some alternatives mentioned, or somewhere in the document, it says, you know, you can have a machine or some mechanism to collect the scripts from the tire instead of, you know, changing the chemical. So I was just get me thinking, what does really mean outside the scope of AA, you know, when you're evaluating different alternatives?
Let me just, it's a good question, and we talked a little bit about that yesterday in terms of, but it's a little outside the scope of our presentation today. I encourage you to go back and look at the documents, but in general, the responsible entities define that scope per our regulation, and then there's a number of considerations for that. And it depends on the specific product we're talking about, but I don't want to deflect that, but we don't have time to go into detail on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you. Do we have any other comments in the room? And do we have any online? Okay, it looks like we do not have any commenters, so we can go ahead and move on. At this point, we're going to go ahead and move on. Oh, excuse me.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead with what you're gonna, and then I just don't want to go to the break, so.
Oh, no, we're going to go to panel discussion on regulatory responses, correct? Okay. Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Art and Kelly. Well, actually, not Art, he's not here today.
Yeah.
So it will be Kelly. Thank you very much. I'll go ahead and pass it on to you.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. I neglected to ask Emma or Jack if they had any clarifying questions. So I don't know if either of you do, but I want to offer you that opportunity at this time before we drop into the discussion.
This is Jack. I'm saving mine for the full discussion, so go ahead.
And hearing nothing from Emma. Oh, okay. All right. And hearing nothing from Emma, I will assume she didn't have any clarifying questions. So now we're moving into the part 1 of the discussion of regulatory responses, which is focused on the Green Chemistry Innovation Fund. And Dr. Grant presented the basis for the department's outline and proposal. And they're really seeking guidance from us as a group on this, and there are, is it right, there are 4, is that the total number of questions on this one is 4? There's, okay, so there's 5 total questions on this one. Oh, 6, okay, my apologies. So we could try to focus on each one individually, but I guess I want to see what the interest of the panel is. So does staff have a request that we cover them individually, or?
Any approach is fine.
Okay, all right. So who wants to lead us off? So please tackle the questions. If you have any other questions or comments, around really thinking about this green chemistry part of the response. I'm thinking that maybe we save, I think there's some other questions more generally about the response that we could save for the second half of the discussion. So, and then we're not fixed as to our time, so we could always, move flex time back and forth within the two pieces of the discussion. So I think I saw Elaine first and then Helen. Okay, either way.
So I had a few thoughts on the grants, how to structure grants and run those. So this is based on, is it me? Oh, God, you have to like eat it, don't you?
I think these mics are not very sensitive to
Okay.
certain frequencies of voices, and I think women
Great.
are disfavored. Yeah, so now honestly, some electronics are not good at certain voice
Okay, yeah,
frequencies.
no, I have a personal space issue. Okay, that I need to project. Okay, so I have over the years done quite a bit with both writing solicitations for grants and reviewing from both a scientific perspective, but relevancy perspective. And then I've got some experience with seeing what you end up with at the end. And what I will say is $8 million is not a small amount of money. And I would just suggest that looking at something like an SBIR model or something where there's a little bit of a two-stage, if the goal, which I keep coming back to from yesterday, because I think it's such a important goal for the program, is driving, innovation, safer products. I would want to, especially in an area where there's not a lineup of things ripe for moving to market, that you might want to think about a two-stage process where the early stage, and I know it's more work, but actually it doesn't necessarily end up having to be more work, because what you're doing is getting a large number of smaller pilot kind of ideas in. The scope can be a little broader than you have a scope here proposing reactive sprayable polymer-based insulation and spray systems, but you could expand it a little bit and let the ideas drive, what makes it to a second stage. And so then you have an ability to first broadly, and this could be open broadly to people that are already marketing the SPF products. There's no reason to exclude them, but there's no reason to only include them. So it can be broad. It can open up and find things that are out there, ideas that are out there, technologies that are only just becoming available. I mean, Julie's spoken about all the advances in materials and things that could be relevant. So anyway, then the second stage would be a larger investment, but it would be on things that had been vetted and where people had demonstrated some feasibility and met some criteria where you feel like you're now really investing in something that's potentially more successful. So if you're going to get down to 5 or 6 possibilities, you want those to be 5 or 6 things that look like like something could be achieved.
Thank you, Elaine. Very interesting comments about the structure of the program, and actually something I was thinking about too. DPR uses that kind of structure for its IPM approach, where there's a preliminary round followed by a second round that's broader implementation based on the proof of concept in the early round. Helen, you're up. I know Mike's next.
Yeah, so I actually have some similar thoughts about how to structure, if you're going to do research funding, how to structure it. I think that one of the things that is not clear is then what? Okay, you've spent $8 million, you funded a bunch of grad students, hurrah, they get their PhDs.
Yeah, no, see.
Then what? And so I was legitimately surprised to see a $2 million number, especially agreed to by industry for material development, just because it's so low compared to what I think of as, I'm looking at Mike, 2 million is kind of like a, maybe you get a bench formulation working. To actually take any of these ideas into a commercialization. Commercialization on average for materials takes about 20 years and many, many millions of dollars to do it. And so, and that's not even counting all of the health and environmental data that you must generate. That's just like making it work, getting the process stood up and all these different things. So I think that there needs to be a then what part of whatever, if you do a research of some type, there needs to be a review at the end of like, what did you find? What did you do? And some bridge between a bench formulation and a commercialization, because you already have 4 or 5 alternatives in this report that they're saying, have data gaps. They were disqualified because of data gap is a major factor in why they were disqualified. And so does it make more sense to fill data gaps on things that are 80% there? Or does it make sense to start fresh with a 2-year, in grad student? So I think that looking not just of let's launch something, let's start a research project. Think about the goal at the end of what you want and work backwards from that of how, okay, at the end, we want a commercialization of a legitimately safer alternative. What does that look like in a materials development world, a chemical formulation development world, and then back out of what you would need to have at the end of your research project? And I think that's something that's you just need to add that in there. I don't think there's any barriers to it in the structure of the regs. I think it can be built into how you put that in place, but I think you need to think beyond just here, let's give out $8 million. Because I got to tell you, I'm one of these manufacturers. I'm like, okay, I'll take $2 million to offset some of my R&D. End of 2 years. Okay. I didn't find anything. Now what? Now what are you going to do to me? Give me 2 more million?
Can I ask a clarifying question of your comment or maybe expansion? Thank you. I'm thinking both about what you and Elaine said is that I'd be curious if you can think of examples that we could look at that are, because we're in a little different space than just pure R&D, that someone's doing it for their own product. We're trying to sort of advance the R&D collectively for this. And so that's the sort of different dynamic. And in a regulatory perspective, your points are really good with like, what is going to be, even in a 2-phase, is there something that we could look at to say, this is how it could work? So
I'll give you my observation of how it's worked in other in other cases. There has to be, I think, to drive true industry adoption, there has to be a deadline of real restriction that's coming. That is really the only thing that's going to drive the kind of R&D, the depth of development that you're looking for here, is to say, okay, we're going to do this R&D, here's the structure of it, and in 5 years, we review it, and we're going to start phasing things out. That's it. It's the only thing that's going to move the needle. And I don't know, that's what's worked.
I would just add in terms of the, if you're going to use the 8 million to sort of out more broadly technical options and things, that's why the scope that you have identified here for the grant program would just need to be broader than exactly a drop-in replacement claim. Really don't want to just be funding R&D that they should be doing anyway. We are looking more broadly for a functional solution.
Kelly?
Elaine, can I ask a follow-up on that? I mean, I think one of the challenges we've come across is there are lots of types of insulations that are not necessarily sprayable and do not necessarily have all those functionalities. And so we tried to limit, or we proposed a limit to the scope of the grants to be more attractive to the manufacturers and to try to fill those same functional needs. Do you think broadening it to include other types of insulations?
So you're so you're talking about function of that particular product chemical, right? And I'm talking about, so it is true that spray insulation, there's not a lot of options for spray insulation. And spray insulation does provide function that is incredibly valuable. So you could limit it to spray insulation and you could still get in all different materials and systems. And that's what I think you're interested in here.
Before we leave this, I just want to check and see if anybody else has their flag up to talk about this particular topic. Okay.
Yes.
Yes, so why don't we follow up on this and then come back in the sequence? So Molly, you were first, Julie, and oh, go ahead, Anne. Then focus on this for a minute since we're here, and then we can come back and get back in the sequence and other comments.
Yeah, I was going to make a similar, or just to amplify that comment about you need to define it more broadly. I know that's challenging in this particular application, but as you're thinking about regulatory response going forward, not to keep tooting the horn of the Berkeley Center for Green Chemistry, but we've had much better results when you broaden it to having not just a drop-in replacement, and we all know that drop-ins are not drop-ins, as we discussed yesterday. That changes the entire formulation. But also a process and material options. And I understand that the tension in this particular place is, I was going to add as a principle for, you had principles to consider include, impact and significance, potential for commercialization and all that. I was going to add ease of adoption. And so those are the tension, that's the tension you're holding right now. If you broaden it beyond, although I think what you just suggested, Elaine, of expanding it to spray systems is broad enough that it would bring in different materials and different processes. So that's just to amplify that point, but broader, you'll get better options.
So staying just on this topic, Molly, Julie, and I think Emma looks like she wants to weigh in on this topic too.
So ditto for just defining it broadly. And I say that in part because there's just this now inherent tension within the program around what Suzanne mentioned about microplastics, right? So you don't want to define this only as like an expectation that polymeric materials are the only ones to achieve the function needed. And so to the extent that you can incentivize, for example, even non-polymeric options, we just have to think about the coherence of the program in general, and you don't want to be supporting innovation in a space that's causing a problem that the program is also trying to correct. So that's one thing. I think another thing here is, yeah, the technical readiness level here, is it all over the map? Are we really at the basic research level? Clarity about where we are in this space to know in terms of that two-stage funding need and the timeline expectations is going to be like necessary to really know where are you funding and therefore what are the expectations of such research programs. I think clarity around certain standards embedded in the request for proposals is necessary. There needs to be some sort of review process in advance that outlines the performance standards expected. There should be agreement about what that needs to look like, that all the research programs are aiming at the same mark. And that those performance standards, I think also, it's not going to be good enough to just to say, tell us how you're going to respond to green chemistry principles. I think there needs to be actual standards of performance related to environmental and health standards. Whatever that needs to look like, you have to ensure
that this is not going to be a respiratory sensitizer. You have to ensure whatever other standards of performance with regard to health and safety, but also performance standards, they need to be written in. And so I think there needs to be a pre-stage of a body coming together to lay out what those performance standards need to be, write them into the solicitation, and expect that of the entities. I also think there's something here about a collaborative innovation R&D model. I think it's really important that academia and business work together on this. And to the extent that we can leverage the existing infrastructure of some of these chemical companies, so that not all money is having to go to one, it's about what can they bring to the table and not just to have the money fund everything. And there's a lot of, there's examples out of my institute, the Massachusetts Toxic Use Reduction Institute, that's done this with the aerospace industry, right? So collaborations between academia and the range of industries that have a stake in the matter, they all bring resources to the table. It's not just money to fund this. And with that, it kind of speaks to the second one, but you have those players at the table with a readiness to scale things once they're viable. And so making sure that's built into the design of this is only going to help the end game.
Still staying with this, I will note the caution of the antitrust issues around collaborations, but I think there's ways of dealing with that. We're going to Julie and then to Emma and then back to Helen.
So I want to echo Molly's comments and on Helen, but I also have some clarifying questions, and it's incentivizing the manufacturers to want to do this. So if I understand right, the $8 million is coming from the responsible entities, right? And are those responsible entities the same people who might get the $2 million back to work on things, or the $2 million is going to companies that are developing alternatives, or?
We have options.
Okay.
It's not defined in the regulations, and so we can structure this. We didn't want to, and I don't believe we can necessarily restrict if one of the companies says, we're willing to spend this and more and do it ourselves, we may not have the ability to do that, and we may not want to, but your point's a good one, is that we don't want to
Constrain it, okay.
constrain it. Yeah.
So to Molly's point about collaboration, where you have academics and industry. So the other example is the Remade Institute, which am part of, have a program with. It's one of the Manufacturing USA institutes. And for all of their programs, it's a 1-to-1 cost share. So DOE provides $1 of funding. Somewhere you need to come up with a $1 match. And the academics in the world are like, oh my God, where am I going to get this? We don't do 1-to-1 matches in universities. It just doesn't exist. But if you think about it instead as a program that basically is industry is going to spend this money anyway, and now the government is giving them a $1 match for every $1 they're going to spend. It works a little better in how you get people at the table. But my point is that industry is going to benefit from this. The manufacturers are going to benefit from this, so they should have a stake in the game. And it's not outside the norm to have the chemical innovation fund provide, $2 million to a particular research activity, and the manufacturers who want to play in that space and be collaborators, they provide a matching $2 million. And that way they're also incentivized to find solutions, to make it solution-based instead of just academic research driven. So there is precedent for that level of commitment from the entities who are engaged.
Thank you, Julie. Emma, thank you for your patience.
Thank you. I expected this to be a rich discussion. I see it as some of the points that have been made.
Emma, your mic isn't working. So you can try getting closer to it, or. It's breaking up.
Can you hear me? No.
It's breaking up and crackly. Is there paper or something in front of it, or?
Why don't you come back to me?
We're not hearing you. Okay. Yeah, she's gonna reconnect. All right, let's move on to Helen while Emma reconnects.
This is a quick comment. Actually, Molly, when you were mentioning performance requirements, this is something that I have experience in. What's really important if you're going to do that is that you have to is if you're setting the performance requirements, make sure that they're not over-engineered. And so you actually have to be a part of that discussion because it's very easy for engineers to just, it's like the requirement, it just has to be better than anything that's ever been created in this material, because that's what we do. We love that stuff. I mean, it's not nefarious. I promise you, it's really not. But you need to just make sure that you're not like turning it to 11 every single time you're setting a performance requirement.
So while we're waiting for Emma, I want to drop in here a reflection on Helen's comment about there being a deadline. So one of the remedies you're not proposing at this point is the one that is a phase out of the product. And that's a very difficult one to do politically, particularly when there's not an alternative out there. It is my professional experience that if there is not a deadline, even if it's way in the future, that there's not the motivation for change, particularly for someone that's fundamentally part of their business. So I'm going to just support that and recognize that challenge, especially the political challenge with having a deadline out there. I did notice in the regulations that there's the ability for the state to adjust some of these things. So that's also a thought. And I see Meredith is interested in responding, and I understand Jack has raised his hand and Emma is back. So I'll let Meredith go ahead.
No, I can.
You're okay? Okay. So Emma, hopefully your voice will be clear now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Hey, thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you. I was saying that I was expecting this to be a rich discussion, and a lot of good points have been made already. I'm going to dare to speculate that it's going to be hard to find an alternative to MDI that meets the chemistry need in this system and has low hazard in this system. That's based on experience. I see some heads nodding. I'm not going to say it's impossible. I think it will be difficult. And so being more broad in the call for alternatives is really important. And one of the ways I would suggest scoping that is for the use. And I think others have kind of mentioned this. Elaine talked a little bit about this, but you're looking for an installation that is effective and easy to apply. So is that sprayed? Probably, but I would encourage broadening the call if that is possible within the confines of the regs. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Meredith, do you want to go now or should I go to Jack?
Yeah.
Okay. Jack, you're up.
Okay, I'm glad you put up intellectual property there because that to me is one of the main concerns of any collaboration among companies and industry. For example, if you give it to an industry or an academic consortium coalition, who owns the patent rights? Is it going to be split? Is it going to be free? How is that going to be divvied up? So I think you have to think about that really seriously going into it. I did notice in reading the report that a lot of the alternatives that were suggested by industry were also patented by individual companies. So DTSC cannot be in the business of picking one intellectual property winner at the expense of the others, because that would be a problem from a commercialization and even a legal issue in terms of patent restrictions. So I think that is going to be an ongoing issue as to who gets it. And the sooner we address that type of thing up front, the better. One hopeful thing is the fact that in the final AA report, industry said that they basically stopped work 5 years ago because of the requirement to eliminate HFC blowing agents. So I think if you think about it, while they had some potentials, they really stopped working on it because they had a more pressing need, which was to lower the greenhouse gas part of their product line. So I think given 5 more years down the road, maybe they would have come up with something that was more doable. The other comment which I had is, do we know about the potential exposure of MDI to people using the product? And the reason I ask is because if you're in a high pressure situation where there's significant worker protection, and we've proposed maybe even going beyond that, our goal is to eliminate exposure, obviously, to MDI. But in a household situation, there's not much done to minimize that exposure. And maybe it'd be better to, just throwing out a thought, maybe better focus on the household use or the occasional use of low pressure, because I would guess that even though the amounts of the material are much lower, the exposure could be considerably higher. So I just think our goal is to eliminate exposure to MDI, and I think there may be a stepwise process, a stepwise way to do that without penalizing industry who use all kinds of safeguards. We've already heard that the final product, which is a foam, except perhaps when its end of life comes in, the foam does not have any issues with MDI exposure. So it's only really during the manufacturing and the spraying of the product that there's an issue. So I just think a lot of these we have to consider when putting a final set of requirements into the industry. That's it.
I'll just jump in and say, I think these are good points from Jack, but it's the spraying and the curing when there are exposures. It takes some time afterwards for the material to actually cure. For the isocyanate to not be a problem.
To me, that's the process itself, but there are ways to mitigate that. I think the final product, as we've heard, does not offer any issues. Obviously, I've worked in the paint industry. Curing is an issue, and you have to account for the time involved and the conditions for curing. So, but the bottom line is, do we know enough about the exposure to MDI for the various types of products, given the fact that there's significant, or there should be significant worker protection for the high pressure. And I did note that not everybody signs on to the industry group doing the high pressure spraying. So that's a problem as well.
Does the staff want to respond to that question?
Well, I'll just say generally, Jack, yeah, we did consider the issues you're talking about in the development of the listing. And we're very well aware of the protocols the industry is using for mitigation. Our overall objective was to find a safer upstream source to eliminate the need for PPE as much as possible. And that's just sort of our construct. So that's been throughout this whole process. And ultimately, you see in the regulatory response, and we're not talking about it yet, but in terms of the training requirements, that we think it's important if in the interim, until or if there's ever a safer alternative.
Thank you. Dr. Williams, I think you're up. Meredith.
Thank you. I find myself thinking about REACH and the EU. When it comes to the timeline, they've wrestled with this issue of phase out and timing, and the sunset timelines are very long. And I don't think that's something we've discussed very much in the program. And whether it's on this product or an upcoming product, thinking about that off ramp, and at what point do we say, revisit a regulatory response to say, we think there are enough alternatives out there that we might, in fact, go back to restriction of the product, perhaps with a certain sunset date based on our understanding of the viability of the alternatives. So I just want to kind of put that out there as something we shouldn't lose track of and what we should learn from. We should be in touch with our European colleagues to make sure we understand.
That's actually a question that I had. When you read the regs, it says the response is final, but there's also my understanding when I was on the science panel, when we were advising the department on the development of the regulations, that it was the department's intent to be able to circle back when there was not an identified alternative. And this is a perfect example of that. I noticed that in the section of the code on AAs, there's the ability for the department to require additional information and perhaps some follow-up work there. And so I'm wondering if that's the means, or, so what is the means for the department to circle back around and ask some of these questions? And I feel like this is very related to the topic we're discussing right now, because Helen raised that question about data gaps and filling data gaps and whether that should be part of the work that is being required of the industry here.
Let me just respond in general. These are really good points, and we have considered these. I'm looking at my legal counsel. Where is she? Thank you. Yes, this is how we're like mind meld. She knew I was thinking about her. But there's an element here of concept and ability and authority and timing of what we know and where we're going to go. But I'll just let Lynn speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something we really want to hear about, is whether or not, do we really need more information up front before we can get really good regulatory responses in place? And, there is this opening that's very kind of, broad in the regs to say that we need more information. We're going to do initial regulatory responses. And then depending on the information we get, there might be more. So is that something that we should be triggering? Like, always here, is that, so that's definitely something we would love for the discussion to address here.
So let's address that, because this has been an undercurrent for a while, and I think Helen's had her flag up, and I think she might want to address this. Okay, so yeah, but let's just address this while we have Lynn here. Does anyone want to say anything about that? I mean, yeah.
I mean, again, looking at our colleagues in Europe, as part of this abridged AA, it was just the consortium and its review of what alternatives were available to it, right? I think if you make a broader call for public consultation, I just think of my own, preliminary science group at the University of Massachusetts. Well, they've done research around different types of, isocyanates and other things to do alternatives related to polyurethane foams. I think if you broaden it out in terms of, just not even getting a feedback from the folks that run the green chemistry award that had an alternative in this space, right? I think there's other things out there. Industry only told us what was available to them in their minds. So I think a broader consultation, getting feedback from academia writ large, getting feedback from startups, getting feedback from smaller businesses that have worked in the space around alternatives that they think can meet this functionality, to understand truly what this landscape looks like now. I think that would help with understanding, are we at a basic research stage? Are we at a pilot stage? What stage are we at with some of this?
Elaine?
So I get a little concerned about sort of a never-ending search for information. At some point, decisions just need to be made. And I do think that the potential of a grants program, so, and I don't think about grants as necessarily going just to academia, which is why I raised the SBIR as just a model or something, but it's almost like if you do it as a two-stage, that's what you're asking for in the first round is what's out there, right? Because that's what you get in the first round. You're only throwing a little bit of money at people and you're saying to them, tell us what's out there, right? And there is a possibility of jumping to a second stage if really you have something that's already viable for the next stage. So if you look at that as just a model, but at the end of the day, you know, you're only going to get whatever you can go forever looking for information. You all spend a lot of time up front digging around, finding what you can find. You ask the regulated entity to provide what they're willing and able to provide. And at some point, I just feel like you know, government takes a hit every time we're paralyzed and don't just make decisions, best decision that can be made at the time point with the information you have.
I want to thank you for that comment, Elaine. I would just, as a reminder, these are all really good points, is that one of the fundamental constructs of our regulations is the concept of trying to leverage people to do work so that it isn't government that has to prove everything and do everything. And so I think these points about having a time frame, having incentives, these are things that we really want to hear about because we are not going to have the bandwidth, even with our new resources, to do 5 of these a year and do regulatory response. So we're looking for a paradigm where we can incentivize and compel, when appropriate, people to do the work to get us there. And so that's really important to us. And this is very valuable.
Jen, I missed your flag. I'm sorry. So let's hold off on that for a minute. Are there other comments about this topic about circling back around? So basically, how is the department? So right now the department's made a proposal that becomes a final regulatory response. And it doesn't include a mechanism for reopening and readdressing. So this is something that I flagged as an issue because I do not believe it was the intent of the regulatory program to do that. It was my understanding as a science advisory panel member when these regs were adopted, that the department had included mechanisms, and I think it's the one that Lynn Goldman described, that would allow it to continue the response until the process until there was a safer alternative. So the idea being that the door isn't, you can't just get out of this by saying, gosh, we don't make this, there's no alternative for us, therefore it's all done, and we'll the state can require us to do some research that we'll just find doesn't come to anything, and put PPE on all the people. That's not what the intent of the regs are, and I think that's pretty clear with the policy information, the policy guidance in terms of regulatory response that are there. So when I hear and see this, I'm thinking that it's going to be an important aspect of this to figure out how this remains open and the pressure remains on until a viable alternative exists. And there's probably more than one way to do that. We've talked about, some of the European models. We've talked about the information request model. What is that model so that this doesn't become a final thing? So I think that's what I'm hearing from the discussion. I just want to see if anyone else wants to, including online, wants to remark on this topic. I know I see Ann does. So why don't you go ahead, Ann?
Well, I appreciate your comment, Elaine, that we could keep looking for information infinitely. This is the first time the department's tried to do anything like this, so I think it's important to be as thoughtful as you were with your first 3 choices of product and chemical combinations. And I really like this idea of a multi-stage. We really don't know where we are, and to Molly's point, there's a lot of stuff out there that the consortium didn't look at, and probably was not available to them. So I think this time we do a 2-phase one. If you think that's available in the regulation, then we should do that, just to see what information's out there. Are we at a basic? That was one of the questions I had, is like, what are these grants for? Are they for R&D, pilot testing, scaling? And so if we have that first question of what technology is out there beyond, as we've discussed, as broadly as possible, different systems, maybe spray systems generally, maybe broader than that. I think that we need a little more information this time around. And plus it sets precedent for a lot of this is going to be pretty contextual. There's some things hopefully that will be sort of slam dunk. We need to get rid of this, and there's clear options. In this case, I don't think it's quite so clear. So getting more information is valuable.
Elaine, just to wrap this up, and then we can move on to.
So this is a little bit of a little bit off track, but so you can just in terms of getting other people to do the work, broadening influence, stimulating innovation. You can do these little contests. So you could take some little 50K out of your grant pool and do these contests. And that's where you get students and just individual people. You stimulate their thinking, you generate ideas, and you just get people trained and understanding that this is how we want people to develop products and think about impacts of those products.
Meredith, you want to say something here?
Just a little riff on that, which is there are these clean tech business plan competitions and, there are networks of them and somehow plugging into those networks. That's, talking about leveraging other resources.
So several people said they wanted to talk about intellectual property. So let's, Helen, I know you did. So why don't you start, and everyone else, if you could put up your flags to remind me.
I think that the question is specifically around like sharing IP. And I just want to, I'm sure you all know this, but it's like the kind of standard way of dealing with this would be a licensing requirement. If you participate and take funding, that there's some sort of FRAND thing that you require. It's like standards essential patenting where you just make it available. You're required to make it available and, under licensing terms. And if you wanted to make, make it easier to do that licensing, you can maybe preset some of those terms. I'm sure you're very familiar with this. This is done all the time. And there's lots of precedent in like the lead-free alloy space where we just made sure that everybody had access to all the right licenses for those materials. And I think that those are different than like responsible entity or independently developed solutions. If they do it, they get the money. There should be no, bones about it. It's like if somebody manages to come up with something amazing, they should be able to reap the benefits of that. So we want to make sure that kind of both of those things probably are in place from an IP perspective.
Thank you. Intellectual property? Jen, did you want to weigh in the IP issue? Yeah.
I wanted to ask Jack, because he had mentioned that this question of who will own the IP and whether he had some suggestions on how to structure that piece. Or Molly, you've done work with, these consortia before. Who owns that? How does that work in the real world?
Jack, are you?
It's standard essential patent. I mean, it's very common.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to go into a rat hole on it right now, but go look up standard essential patents. It's like you create a consortium. It has standard terms of who owns what background IP gets brought in and not. And there are different ways of structuring it. Some are a little bit better, some are a little bit worse, but there's many models out there. Just find one that kind of you think works for you and get that in place.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting at, is just that it should be recognized up front. There has to be some sort of IP sharing. Maybe you limit it in part to those funding it, making others who don't fund it pay some nominal amount. It depends on how you want to do it, but it can be structured. There's plenty of models, as people have been saying. One of my concerns was the fact that there are patents out there, as we saw from the AA. And I think those would be a bit more difficult because companies have already put in some time and effort into them. But even there, as long as you agree in advance what can and cannot be shared, or what is a company's sole patent rights or not, you can do it up front. But I just think it has to be done up front rather than somebody saying they got the wrong impression that it was going to go to the consortium who is doing it, or some academic institution, and they want patent rights for everything. So as long as it's defined up front, there should be no issue.
What you would, sorry, I'm not a lawyer, so I want to be really clear that I'm not giving legal advice on this. That being said, one of the ways that you would often deal with a third party that is outside of the consortium is you try to bring them in to the consortium and you work out what the deal is of their pre-existing IP. And so in the real world, everybody has IP that reads on everybody else. And so you put a little bit of pressure on the people who are outside of the consortium that encourages them to basically join the consortium and bring their IP with them under some terms that you come up with. As a general rule, it's problematic in some ways, but that's generally how the world works. It's like you don't really want a lot of outside independent people suing one another. You want kind of everybody to agree that here's the IP that we're all going to be using to accomplish whatever that is.
Anybody else?
Feel free to jump in and
Anybody else want to weigh in on the IP thing? Okay, so let's say in the next 10 or so minutes, try to wrap up the green chemistry research part of this discussion. I think we're kind of flowing into the second part of the discussion as well anyway, so that's okay. Anne, you've been patiently waiting.
What are you considering the second part of the discussion?
So after the break, which is somewhere in the 10:45 range, we'll be talking about the product information to consumers and interestingly use restrictions, which we've already been starting to delve into, and there's a set of questions there. And I realize that folks may have other comments, and part of what's happened here is we've deviated into some more fundamental issues that are really important for the regulations. So we can continue that deviation afterwards. So I want to make sure we give the staff the feedback on the green chemistry challenge stuff before the break.
Okay, and I think I'm still relevant. So I think the threads have been clear this morning to look at existing models for the grant making and for dealing with IP. The other one I wanted to bring in was the GC3 preservatives project, which was also a consortium thing. The key parts of that we've already talked about this morning, but I just want to amplify is setting those criteria up initially, like what is it we're actually looking for? And then having the consortium and the RFP address those, like what are the specific criteria, technical and performance criteria that you want? And then on a different side, this innovation fund, it's as I mentioned yesterday, I've been doing some research on green chemistry metrics for investors, and this kind of innovation fund, we're sort of seeing an emerging alignment. I think I mentioned this yesterday as well, that focusing by sector and by functional application is the way to scale, that we think that's the way to scale. So we want to experiment with it. And so I was going to suggest that we have some in our ecosystem, some friendly venture capital investors, and it would be interesting to have a chat with them on, what they'd like to see, and maybe give you some feedback on what the shape of the innovation fund could look like based on their experience in different sectors. And I'm happy to introduce you to folks. And then amplifying Helen's, the other thing that I discovered in my research is that the real shift that needs to happen, and Meredith, maybe I need to follow up with you on climate tech, is we need to shift from short-term investment, 5 to 7 year ROI in green chemistry, especially if we want to scale it to 10 to 15 or even 20-year investments, because the examples that we have took 20 years in deep pockets to get on the market. So just to be thinking, just to echo what Helen said about be aware of the now what, once we get the technology, what's it going to take to get it to scale? So those are the main things that I wanted to bring up about the innovation fund. But just to say that you are very much in alignment with other thinking about how we advance green chemistry from different points of view. So both philanthropy and large companies, and there's watch in the next few months some new innovation funds and new approaches to scaling green chemistry will come up. And hopefully will be complementary to what you're talking about.
So other folks want to weigh in on this, Suzanne?
Yeah, I will admit that this discussion is a bit outside of my research experience and such, but one big picture concern is I understand that it takes a long time to develop a new product and to get it approved and to get it on the market. But if the Safer Consumer Products Program is planning on promoting green chemistry and having people develop these new products, not just for this scenario, but other scenarios, are you committing to 20 years for each process? And is that a potential concern long-term?
That is an excellent question. Others? Mike?
And I agree, this was a great discussion. My initial comments were all covered. Helen said a lot of what I was going to say much more eloquently than I ever could. And as did the group. I want to touch briefly, I don't know that we've directly addressed question one. And I think, commercialization was to me the big key. But in question one, there is no right answer to this, especially if you look broader than just this case. But if you look at this case, the internal R&D is going to take place after a chemical or solution is developed. If you develop a greener chemical that can be added, or I don't want to neglect, if you develop a portable nozzle that will do what Kelly was talking about, that there was a nozzle that would limit the exposure, but it wasn't portable. If someone develops that outside, most likely, or it's going to be the chemical industry portion, not the manufacturer of the product itself, or it's going to be a packaging company, not the manufacturer itself. That manufacturer then needs to come back in and do their internal R&D to utilize these products in their individual formulations and systems. So there's a lot of pieces that are going to have to fall in place. You're going to have to commercialize, assuming it's a chemical or a component, you're going to have to commercialize that. But each of the manufacturers is going to need to dedicate the time and money to utilize that product. And you're still not necessarily talking with the amount in the research grant of, are you going to have data gaps still? A lot of these studies are long-term studies. And if it's a novel chemistry, are you going to really solve the problem or not? So I wanted to weigh in on that one and make sure that we did officially cover that question and be very sadly ambiguous. And I can't just say, oh, we all would love this, because there's no wrong answer to it.
I'm just reflecting on this program that we helped to convene last year, which was this collaborative innovation forum on 6-PPD and tires, right? So very, very early stage, we have a problem, people. We need to get rid of 6-PPD in tires. And, to the point about how to engage manufacturers in this process, I think a convening of that nature where what was interesting is we had multiple chemical suppliers show up. We had multiple tire companies show up, right? There's multiple entities here that might need to be involved. And I'm just thinking, yes, it's the chemical company, but it's the users of this too, right? So the engagement somehow of what does innovation need to look like? What are the questions that are being asked? What's the expectations? And in that forum, they asked us, well, what are the design parameters? How will we know you all will think it's going to be safe enough, right? So there were very specific questions that started to get asked. And out of that, partnerships were formed and research is now happening, right? So there is an engagement opportunity and an eagerness, and certain chemical suppliers and manufacturers that weren't in the space of 6-PPD are now researching alternatives to 6-PPD. So it doesn't have to be the same actors in the MDI space, right? There's engage a broader array they see a market opportunity and a need, and they're going to pounce on it.
So thank you, Molly. I just wanted to comment that a little outside the scope of this, but that's a great example of what we were talking about yesterday in terms of the value of collaboration. And that, I think, because 6-PPD came on the scene really quickly and there hadn't been a lot of work, that forum and our discussions and the collaboration of all the different stakeholders and saying, well, California is moving forward in our framework. Washington's looking at their perspective. EPA is doing their thing. And it was amazing to me that some of the folks in Canton, Ohio, the academics that are the rubber people, were just getting in on this. But the power of that is exactly what you said, is that a lot's going on that's moving it all forward. So that it's right now where we're at is down the stream to the fourth phase of our process, which has been long. So I'm just making the point that this is where we need engagement early on. And it also speaks to the level of effort that we have to do upfront and that we need that collaboration so that when we get to regulatory response, a lot of that has happened and then we can be strategic and specific and time measured and with specific outcomes. And that's super valuable. Thank you.
So I want to note a couple of things here. One is that this is fundamentally different than tires because tires are a formulated product and 6-PPD is an added ingredient. And the tire manufacturers buy from suppliers so they can look for other suppliers. The issue here and the thing that I'm really struggling with this process is that we're asking people who are fundamentally embedded in a particular technology and particular chemical system to identify the alternatives. And so in some way, recognizing that it's fairly unlikely to work, it's possible that the companies with enough resources will really dive into this, or they'll be able to buy somebody or move into a different technology. But I think it's equally or perhaps more possible that it's just not going to happen. So the department really needs to think about the long-term arc on this and make sure that there's enough force out there. The tire manufacturers know that 6-PPD has to be gone because it's killing coho and they're getting sued for other reasons and their liabilities in the many billions of dollars for this. So far, MDI manufacturers don't have any of those external motivations. So we're really looking at motivations that come through this process to get there. And then I also want to echo something that Molly said. And others have mentioned, the department had envisioned a science advisory panel to advise this program. And when I first read it, I said, wow, that's the perfect thing. And now that I think about it a little more, I think it needs to be a broader panel than just a science advisory panel that would include users and other kinds of stakeholders in shaping the questions. So scientists are part of, but not the primary part of that, or maybe there's two panels or something like that, because what are those criteria, what are the answers to some of these questions are really value and policy questions and not questions that scientists and engineers can scope out. So Emma, Jack, do you have any last minute items on this particular topic before we take a break and move to the next topic?
No, thank you.
I'm good.
Thank you. And anyone last remarks in the room? All right, let's take a break until 11 o'clock. Let's try to regather then for the second part of the discussion. So I'm reconvening the meeting. Got it. Thank you. So the panel discussion now, we'll be moving into a discussion of the product information to consumers and the use restrictions regulatory response. And this is again informed by Kelly's presentation earlier and the information from the background document. We have a set of questions again provided by the staff. I think there's just two. Is this? And this. Yeah, so these are the two main questions. I realize our discussion has wandered into some other things and I do not want to cut that off because this is also more generally about regulatory response. So with that, I'm wondering if someone wants to launch into this section to tee us off.
So starting on the first question, I guess my question in return would actually be, have the recommended communication guidelines been validated and tested with users? And that would basically be my thing. And for any kind of class of communication would just be test it with someone who's never used it before. This is like basic user studies. Like we do this all the time in consumer products. You test a thing, you see how people understand it. You run different, whatever. You get a bunch of people who've never done a thing before and you give them instructions. I don't know what, I think that it's a different type of problem. Very, very solvable. I can't say that what you're recommending is effective because unless you've done that work, you don't know.
Mike?
And similarly, I like the idea of the simple graphics and clear statements to communicate. What I'm concerned with is, first, you need a methodology to make sure that the manufacturers make it extremely obvious to the users, especially the DIY, that there is new information that they need to somehow figure out. You throw the word new on a packaging and no one reads it. No one really reads the use and handling and precautions on packaging unless they have a reason to do so. So there are people that it's a concern of, and they will read it, but your average home user is going to say, I have used this particular product for years. Yeah, go ahead and put all this stuff on, and I'm just going to do what I've always done. It's been fine, right? And they don't understand that there is new information around. So make sure that there is some sort of communication, and maybe it's not on package, maybe it's on store shelf, whatever, that makes them do this and make it easy. The simple and clear statements, I think this came up a bit in your discussion. People, not me, when they do a lot of these projects, I like to read. Everyone, it seems now, if I'm going to look for how to do something that I don't know how to do, you get all the videos, and I don't like to follow a video while I'm doing a project, because it's like, okay, I'm under the sink, I'm trying to do something, and now I got to start and stop the video. Yeah, exactly. But it's what people like, and if you can get that out on social media, which I also don't do a lot of, where it's going to be accessible to current layers of consumers, to me, it's not necessarily, I think you did a good job saying what you want communicated. It's making sure the communication is received on both, the consumers, the direct consumers, yes. Also, the mandatory training on the professionals. You want to make sure that that's truly received by the people. You're going to get a list of, oh yeah, we had this mandatory training and all these people took it. And did they really understand it? How do you ensure that? That's a very complex thing. You can say, sign that you understood it. Did they really understand it? I think, to me, you need an audit function. I know that's not within your necessary scope, but I do a lot of auditing, and you run into training programs and they're great. They're extremely well set up. The content is great, but that people are in a rush on their day-to-day jobs. And do the people who are really going to be exposed to these chemicals understand what was presented to them, why it's so important to them, why they should make their job take longer? So I think that's just a key piece to figure out. I don't have an elegant solution for it, because you got to stay within what you're doing, and you can ask the manufacturers to do that, but make sure that they're a comprehensive report back to you, without you having spent a ton of time now monitoring all of their reports, and not, you're going to end up with a person whose sole job is to monitor these reports coming back from the manufacturers.
Carl, then Suzanne, then Jack, then Emma.
Yeah, just a comment and some more information. Thank you, Mike, about your point, particularly on the training for the low pressure. I just wanted to expand a little bit on what Kelly had provided in terms of the training that has already been developed by the Spray Polyurethane Foam Alliance, which is a membership of many of the responsible entities and contractors and the people who actually do the work. And that program has a training program which has been around for many years. It is an excellent program. I actually, when I attended their national conference, sat in on the oversight. It's what a training program should be. It's trained to specific task. It has hands-on assessment. It has recertification. It has metrics. And it's done by the people who do the work. And it's a very robust program. So what we've put in this is really a performance, saying that is a great performance standard, right? And so that's not a heavy lift in terms of how would you do it well. And so we're just so people know that from our perspective, there's a really great program out there for the high pressure. So.
Thank you, Carl. So Suzanne, Jack, and then Emma.
Yeah, just a quick comment in support of something that was said earlier in response to an earlier round of questioning, but if the recommendations around use of this product are going to change significantly, should it be put in a restricted area of stores where it's being sold? I think Kelly mentioned this, and I think that above anything else would get people's attention and make them realize that maybe, yes, I do need to read the instructions this time. I will admit I'm guilty of, using things too and not necessarily reading every single line of the safety recommendations. But I do wonder if we are that concerned about potential human health impacts, should that extra step be taken, and is there a way to make that possible?
Thanks, Suzanne. Jack, you're up.
Thank you. I agree with everything you've said so far, Mike. I agree. The one thing just to caution is that for commercial users, safety data sheets are required. And I just want to make sure whatever you put into your statements, check them with the safety data sheet to make sure you're not sending out conflicting data. I know people really don't read those, but they are available to anybody working with the product in a commercial occupational setting. I think some of the proposals for the DIY type applications, I think you really have to think hard about putting them into a lock cage. I think it's probably going to be the best way to manage this. There are enough places where you have to have some sort of checks and balances on buying aerosol paint. So it may be the right way to do it. Also, make sure that when you put in requirements for gloves and respiration, you put in the right type of glove. Gloves are, there are different kinds of gloves for different purposes, and you don't want to just say use any glove because it may not be the right one. Same with face masks, etc. You want to make sure you get very specific on what can and should not be used.
Thank you, Jack. Emma, it's your turn.
Yeah, lots of great comments. And to Jack's comment, it made me think if retail can be involved, maybe they can put the PPE next to the product. So when people buy the product, and hopefully you can have some communication about you should consider this PPE, and the PPE is on the shelf next to it, so you can pick up the right glove, the right mask. It makes it easier, right? People will do things if they're easy. To the comments about different forms of communication, written, video, etc. I think that's people respond to different types of communication and to different trusted messengers. Those are important. And I just wanted to share an anecdote. In the past year, I had some contractors at the house doing some work, and they decided to fill a space with some one component foam. And so I was knowledgeable about the spray foam, and I considered that whereas I don't I rarely have an exposure to this material, they may have daily exposures to this material. And so I downloaded some information on exposure prevention from the EPA website and gave it to them and said, here, I'd like you to be aware and to consider your health as you are working on a daily basis. Not knowing if they would read it even or consider it. They had to return to the house to do some repairs, and the contractor told me that he had read it and had gone out and purchased the appropriate PPE. And I thought that was a really wonderful example of just really, touch point, really putting information into someone's hands that's clear, as you say here, using simple graphics and clear statements, and that people will take that information and consider it and make changes. So that's all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Emma. That's a touching example. Julie, you're up.
I just want to echo on the safety data sheets that Jack mentioned. Make sure they're consistent information. And on the labeling, whether the GHS labels should be used rather than just generically created ones. Again, people look past it, just like the Prop 65 warning and things. It tends to be pervasive, and they don't they think everything is and embedded, but not really going to affect them, but at least try to be consistent.
Thanks, Julie. Helen?
I want to go back to what Mike was saying about the social media communication. And it's not just in this particular case. I think anytime that you have a DIY communication, you're going to need to have the YouTube, the TikTok, the social media content of your own. And I would encourage you to reach out to the influencers who are on those platforms to bring that in, because there are lots and lots of DIY home repair people that are doing amazing things, by the way. I mean, if you ever spend some time, you should spend a little bit of time looking at this world. They have way more time on their hands than I ever will, retired or otherwise. But that is really pretty much everyone's first stop. If you're going to do a big DIY project that you have never done before, it is literally the first thing you're going to do is you're going to look it up on YouTube and you're going to watch a 20-minute video or whatever of whatever that thing is. And so you can't ignore that as a vector. It's going to probably be the highest impact vector because you're going to reach the people who are actually about to open up the container and do the thing. So you want to stop, if you want to not stop, but intervene. This is going to be probably way more impactful, frankly, than putting something in a cage or putting something on an SDS. So I just want to echo that, emphasize that. And right now, that's not sort of explicit or required or whatever. So, as a best practice, that's probably going to be for anything DIY, where you, especially if you've got a pro material that a DIY might use. That to me seems like a really important thing to have as a best practice.
So not seeing flags for the moment. Oh, Molly, go ahead.
I don't live in the state, and so I'm completely blanking on the names of organizations, but it just feels like we're going down the route of where we have really experienced leadership in the labor organizations around this topic. And to the point about leveraging partnerships and trying to not have the program staff do everything, right? There's a robust network of occupational safety and health groups in California. They've thought about this with regard to methylene chloride way back when. So a lot of this labeling, instruction, education, outreach, partnering with them to get this out. They know how to do this and they do it for a living. So just to, again, don't take it all on yourself. There's great resources and organizational capacity outside this program to do a lot of this.
So I'm going to leap in here with a yes and to most of the previous comments. I think there's a real fundamental difference between the over-the-counter purchasers and the contractors, so the licensed contractors. On the licensed contractor side, the question is, I have a couple questions. One is, could this somehow be connected to contractor licensing or other mechanisms that would help with the enforcement and save some time for the departments? Another is that I've seen in the pesticides world that the person overseeing the work is the one who gets the training. So they're the ones who are buying the pesticide, and the actual workers who may or may not have English language skills and might speak a language other than Spanish, although Spanish is very common in California construction work, are not necessarily getting the training. So this is something that concerns me in the process, and maybe I'll pause here because Carl wants to say something.
Well, thank you, Kelly. A good point. On the specifics of the training, the SPFA construct has supervisor training. It also interestingly has training and certification for distributors. Mm-hmm. So they've really thought through what role you are, and that's something that we would work through, I think, as we go down that path. And in terms of other mechanisms and bringing that into, say, state contractors board licensing requirements, that's something we don't control, but it's something worth looking at. And I think this also speaks to our desire not to reinvent the wheel and to complement because we recognize that whether in this space or we're rarely regulating someone who isn't regulated by someone else. And so that on the ground, to make it real and effective, we want to complement that, not go counter to that and be efficient. So I don't know if Kelly, you want to add?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, we spoke to CSLB. I'm gonna blank on the acronym, but the licensing board for, believe they license insulators and acoustical contractors or some odd combination. And it really did not seem feasible to work through that licensing program at this point. But it is something that we explored because, yeah, we do want to leverage those partnerships. So it's an excellent idea. Thank you.
Oh, it's such an excellent idea. You'd already done it. As true with many of the panel's comments, and just really want to acknowledge that it's not uncommon that we're commenting on things that the staff have already delved into in some detail. And so it's not really novel. And in some ways it is reinforcing for us to do that. And so I don't regret that we do that. In terms of the over-the-counter users, there are also two classes there because there's people who are buying over the counter because they're an electrician or a plumber or somebody like that. And so they aren't in the same category as buying the professional system. They're just using the can or even a handyman. And in addition to the regular do-it-yourselfer. And this is the group I'm actually the most worried about in terms of the ability to execute any kind of training and protection equipment. So that's something I'm not having the sense that the measures that are in place are likely to be very effective in that regard. And the reason I'm having that is my experience with pesticides, where there is very poor adherence to the label. In fact, there's very infrequent reading of the label, as Mike, I think, articulated pretty clearly. So I'm kind of wondering if more thought should be given in that area and the potential for a different course, like more making it harder to buy or setting a date by which maybe these kinds of products shouldn't be available anymore, or examining the trade-offs. I recognize that energy conservation is a key aspect of these products, and also sealing holes for pest control and other things are really important. But it makes me wonder if the performance is really necessary. The question is it necessary to have this product in that market space, and if so, how, and what can happen there? We were talking about PPE. Maybe PPE should be part of the package, so that does make it more expensive, but compared to the overall cost of the job, the cost of packaging with a mask and gloves might not be very high if they're disposable, and that might solve a lot of these problems in the non-professional market. And the professional market, we would hope that wouldn't be necessary. We talked a bunch about performance criteria. I'm really concerned about having the department lay something out there, and then they're to making sure that there's a feedback loop so the department and the industry can learn how well is this doing, how much are people actually adhering to these requirements, how successful is it is. You've been talking about reporting, but I don't know if what that reporting would entail and how that would all work, and could you adjust the remedy? If it's a one-time remedy, could you adjust it later? There's been some efforts in that regard between EPA and manufacturers on pesticide labels, and they've even said, we'll require an icon or something like that. And the icon was like so tiny you couldn't see it on the label, or the icon didn't mean anything to the consumer because the industry came up with something that their folks thought were great in genuine, really thought so, and it was completely useless from the point of view of the consumer or user. So, and same things with wording and instructions and so forth. So this is something that I think, I don't know exactly how to deal with that, but it feels like there needs to be some performance criteria, and some learning might be possible if you have not already done that from the pesticides world in terms of how labels work. You may have already explored all of that kind of stuff. And finally, I wanted to circle back to something else. One of the public commenters asked the question about the schedule. And we also heard a presentation the other day about the new legal changes that allow the department to shortcut the AA process with information that it comes from somewhere not necessarily specified that's credible. And so around that, I had a couple questions. One is, should this process take as long as it did? Should there be the requirement to do kind of the shortcut AA if we really know that there isn't, or the manufacturers are going to say there isn't an alternative? Should there be some sort of shortcut way to get to the remedy that doesn't take as long as this one took? And secondly, should there be a way of circling back around that might take advantage of that AAA authority? So when the department identifies that there are feasible alternatives that maybe are not associated with the companies that are part of, or the responsible entities here, is there some way that the department can shortcut back towards a different regulatory response? And I don't know if that's even feasible under the code. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about this in terms of the timing question and the feasibility of follow-up action.
That's a lot in the question. I think a couple of things, and I'll let Andre comment, is like what you're suggesting is, I think fundamentally, do we need to revisit some of the regulatory requirements? And so that's a whole another GRSP meeting probably. And we have the ability to do that. And, broadly, we are planning next year to start cleaning up some of the regulations for some of the things that are not substantively significant, but need to be cleaned up. But we are considering opening it up for other substantive things, and that's going to be a longer term process. So to that general response to your question, I would say that within, and I'm looking at Andre and Lynn, is that we have a fair amount of flexibility in some of these things, and certainly regulatory response is one of those. And what we laid out in our proposal are some specifics, and we're looking for feedback on how we might modify that. So it's going to evolve, and it is somewhat iterative until we get there. So the input's really valuable. I'm not sure if Andre, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say briefly that in this particular case, the authority to shortcut to the regulatory response is sort of a moot point. I guess we're already there. So I didn't know if you were proposing that we, maybe that's what Carl was speaking to as far as like changing our framework a bit to, I think in this particular case, it took a long time in large part due to the litigation. So I don't know, that's all.
Yeah, I was kind of asking a lessons learned question about the past. A lot of the delay was the litigation, and it was still a long time before. I mean, I think it was pretty much a foregone conclusion. The manufacturer is going to say we don't have an alternative. And so it's still, knowing that, it still feels like a long time before we're actually getting to regulatory response, despite the litigation delay. So when I'm looking back, I'm asking the question, if that's a foregone conclusion, is there going to be a way to speed that up? That's one question. And then the second question is, coming back around to this again, is there going to be some way to move to a different remedy when there is finally an alternative?
And I think I was just looking at the framework regulations while people were talking, and it looks like it says when it's final currently under our regulations. So I don't know that it's there now, but.
Well, I think some of it, Andre's correct in that some of it depends on what we put in the regulatory response, and does that have a due date, a reopener, and things like that. Right. So I think there's ways to do it, and this discussion has been very helpful in that. To your first part of that question, though, there are a variety of reasons it took so long to get there, and one of them being is we were just building it, and so it was new. The other one is we didn't have the resources, so we were constantly juggling, and then the lawsuit was a big part of that. But more broadly, we knew when we selected this product, this specific one, that we were anticipating that we would be here.
Yeah.
Right, because we'd done a fair amount of research looking at the issues, and we didn't see a clear path for alternatives. That said, one of the things we've learned is that we only know so much. And we always learn a lot when we start diving in, and it's an iterative process. So to Molly's broader point earlier about, a lot of it depends on the scope of what you're looking at and where you want to go. And all of the categories we laid out yesterday are, with the exception of maybe the face mask, but even that, are extremely broad and deep with lots of layers. And I think we have done a couple of things in addition to getting resources. We've learned a lot about how our process works. We learned a lot about how to meet the standard we're trying to reach in a more timely manner. And I think 6 PPD is a really good example of that, is that when that came up, we quickly moved on it. And relatively speaking, it's the fastest we've ever gotten to a regulatory action. I anticipate that will continue. There are some other questions, which I might, maybe for another date, but we heard a lot of really positive feedback about the quality of our work. And we really appreciate that. And we worked hard, particularly from the get-go, to understand for a new program, it was really important that the rigor and quality of our work was solid. And we worked really hard on that. We've heard feedback from many stakeholders about, can't you go faster? That begs the questions, are we doing too much? And is the level of effort we're doing too much? We could maybe just focus on one hazard trait and go right there and low bar. We have a lot of discretion. That's a double-edged sword. So that's, I'm not trying to change the discussion, but I'm just saying this is very helpful, but in practice, there's always trade-offs. It's like an AA. We can do really solid ironclad platinum background document, which and Elaine just read them and they're solid and they're very useful. Or we could do something simpler, faster, but maybe not as comprehensive. And our other concern is, where does that leave us when we get to here? If we haven't set the tone and the bar that says, we've looked at this, we're honing on this, we've done this work, you've got to do more. If we don't do that up front, does that mean it's going to have to impact us down the road? So they're complex response to a straightforward question. Sorry.
Thank you very much. I see Helen and Jack turned his camera on, so I'm kind of guessing he wants to say something. And before we quit, I think Suzanne needs to say something.
So I wanted to go back to your licensed trade point. I think that you are right. There are 3 different sort of users, right? So you've got the professionals, you've got the DIYs, and then you've got the professional licensed trade. And I had a very similar experience to Emma with my contractors as well. When they were doing the similar work, I just said, hey, I'm really familiar with this. You really need to take this PPE requirement seriously, and here's why. And they did. And they have continued to do that. So from the specific case here, I think that what this means is your licensed trades are actually a stakeholder that needs to be consulted in the communication plan. And I'd start with just asking them, a few of them, what would actually change behavior effectively. I think that that's probably, for this case, a relatively straightforward thing to do. And maybe as a best practice going forward, to just maybe go back to the list of stakeholders which you make at the beginning, and just make sure that all of the people that you're communicating with, or that all the right stakeholders are actually consulted at this later point, because you do it in the front end, but maybe do it again in the back end, just to make sure you're covering all those people and you're communicating, you're meeting them where they're at, and you're not trying to hope that, throw a pass and hope that they're there to catch it at the end.
Thank you, Helen. I appreciate that. Jack, do you want to weigh in at this point?
Just a quick note. I don't know if that professional society that Carl had been to has any certification processes, but I'm familiar with ASHRAE, which is a professional group which will give certification to heating and air conditioning contractors. And the bottom line is, if you find out your contractor is ASHRAE certified, then you've got confidence that they're going to do it right. I don't know if that's something that group does or not, but it's just one more step that consumers can take to make sure that the work that's being done is being done by certified installers.
So before we go to Suzanne, we're close to wrapping up, and I just wanted to see if Emma wanted to say anything else on this topic before we close it out.
No, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Suzanne.
Sure, and not to harp on this too much, but this goes back to an earlier comment about the microplastics concern, and also builds on some of the things that Molly had to say about non-polymeric alternatives. And I realize that so much work has gone into this, and that the process started far before the group was even considering, monitoring or regulating products that have the potential to release microplastics. But to me, this points out a potential issue with the way these different products are put into categories. And that product like this is one of lots of examples, I think, that are going to come up that fall into multiple categories. And so maybe taking a step back and thinking about how products are placed, how they're, maybe we can't silo something and say it's only going to do X, it's only this soluble chemical or MDI, or it's only the microplastics, it's only it. And I think it also gets to Tim's comment from yesterday about cumulative impacts too, because when you're thinking about human exposure, you're not just thinking about the exposure to the MDI or other chemical components, but also that the microplastics and eventually nanoplastics that break down from the product are going to create different pathways for exposure to not just to humans, but also to the environment. So I realize that's, kind of backing the truck out a little bit in bigger picture, but I think this product really highlights that challenge. And I know it's a big challenge and that's not an easy thing to resolve in the next 20 minutes. But
I actually think this is a really important comment because how we define safer has changed a little bit since this first listing in 2013. And thinking about where this is heading, I mean, this is an example where there's not an obvious alternative. We all are hopeful and in some ways, I think, optimistic that innovation will create a safer alternative. How is safer defined? Some of that may start being defined through it, assuming the whole grant process proceeds through some criteria around the grant. How holistic are those things? So this is a pretty difficult thing. It's the kind of thing that some forward thought can create a really different societal outcome on. And that's why I think Suzanne's comment is really important. So I think there is no easy solution to this. It's just something that the program needs to carry and own in a way. So any last comments on this topic in the room or any questions from staff at this point?
Just a final comment, just to say, I'm so excited that this, Green Chemistry Innovation Fund is moving forward. And I think that California, once again, will be a model of how to stimulate innovation in green chemistry. We have a federal government that's trying to do this through its Sustainable Chemistry R&D Act. There's an interagency working group that's trying to figure out parameters to stimulate innovation in green chemistry. You all need to share with them what you're doing, because hopefully they can leapfrog in a national way to once again learn from California this model. I mean, you're wrestling through all the really significant, challenging questions about how to do this. What are the criteria? How do you create partnerships? What's the right level of funding? What stage of funding is the right level, right? So anyway, I just want to encourage you all to also interface with this national program. It also might be an asset going forward to leverage additional funding that might be able to support some of this work.
Thank you, Molly. And I thank you. I think that what Molly's saying and what we've been saying for quite some time is that we're reaffirming that this is a very difficult set of questions, that what the department's trying to do here is hard and it won't be perfect. I think all of us on the panel are hoping that our comments will help and trigger additional thinking on the part of the department towards being there. So maybe I will leave that there and move towards wrapping up. And the clock is ticking, and this is the last meeting that Carl will be here and in his role, and my last meeting as chair. And so I'm kind of watching it tick by and going, oh dear, here Here we go. So I want to move into the wrapping up. This has just been an amazing meeting from folks online, folks in the room, the staff work that's been involved in all of this. You know, I want to thank each and every staff member, many of whom are not, I can't even look at your faces, and many of whom are not in the room, in the effort they put together on and the work that they're doing every day on this program. You know, we just have the opportunity to come in and sprinkle a little fairy dust around and hopefully get people excited about this stuff again. You're here every day making this happen and doing the best you can. And I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to the committee members. This was a huge packet. There were a ton of questions. It was a lot of homework. And we, yeah, Helen's holding up the thing. She printed stuff. That's mine's all here. But I think that the richness of the conversation was exciting and surprising to me, actually. And I really had thought a lot, and this was even more than I could have expected from the committee. So it's very exciting to be able to facilitate and be part of this group, including the folks who are online. So I want to give my deepest thanks to all of you for making this possible and making it easy for me to be part of this group and help you get your ideas out and share them in dialogue with the department staff. So with that, I think I want to turn it over to Carl.
Thanks, Kelly. I'll say a few things. Yeah, so a couple of things. One, we covered a lot of ground in the last day and a half, and a lot of great input. And I want to echo Kelly's thanks to our staff who do the work, who make this happen, who day to day keep forging ahead. And I think I want to thank Kelly and Art too for their leadership and service all this time. And it's been extremely valuable to the department and to our program and to all the GRAS members. And I think, you know, one of the things you talk about is, you know, measurement and metrics and, you know, how do we make it happen? And I know that it may be difficult to see when you leave here, and if we only meet a couple of times a year, your impact. But I want to assure you that the power of this input is real, and it translates into regulatory text. It translates into decisions the department makes and can make, and that's super important. And to have these many brilliant voices and commitment to shared goals, regardless of your perspective, is really powerful for this program. And so I thank you for that. I challenge you moving forward to continue that. And one of the great things this meeting has really energized me in thinking about the future and time. And I'm incredibly optimistic that we at DTSC will continue to do good work and make progress, and we will do that with our partners, you know, across the country and worldwide. And so just personally, I am filled with such gratitude for having the opportunity to work with all of you and move forward and with such an amazing staff and leadership. And I'm very thankful.
Thank you. Well, I'll just start with Carl and thank you for essentially creating everything you saw today, over the last 2 days in many, many ways, because of how astute you are, because of your appreciation of what it means to be a regulator that can be effective and to do work that has an impact. We all know how much heart you have, and I think the entire program reflects that heart. But the combination of heart, strategy, persistence, enough anger to keep going when you need to, and I'm not kidding. It's just rare to have everything that you've brought to this program, and to not just this, but you have no idea the range of work Carl has done. Well, maybe some of you do because you've been with the department for such a long time, but his emergency response stories are not to be missed. They are tremendous. So I could go on as you know, and I will. I'll do that somewhere else. But thank you. I do think you've created that. Art and Kelly, just so steady at the helm, so consistently working to make these meetings as valuable as they could be. You know, when there was a germ of an idea that the staff had about how do we get information from the GRSP, they would hone it, they would challenge it, they would tackle it, and then they would come here and guide a conversation that led us to places like we've seen in the last 2 days that I agree with you, Kelly, unexpectedly rich. As much as we know how great the information we get from you, the input you all provide, it was even deeper and richer than I would have expected. So I thank you for so many years of service. And it is a time of change. And I'm excited, you know, Molly made me excited about what it'll be to have her in that role. You know, the two of you are going to do great things, just moving things along. Yeah, there you go. It's so it is a bit of a security blanket as we go through this time of change to feel so confident in the next round of leadership. And then I'm going to just say for me personally, would be us. This is a hard department. We work on stuff that's really heartbreaking. I was at a site last week where it's just incredible to think that Chrome 6 had been disposed of in a wash, directly into a wash that was hundreds of yards, just a couple hundred yards from the Colorado River, on incredibly sacred tribal land. And the tribes told us what that land meant to them. And even the cleanup is a violation to that tribe. I'm about to get on a plane to go to LA to talk to folks. We're cleaning up lead contamination in properties around a lead acid battery recycling plant. This is tough stuff. And if we don't break the cycle, somebody else is going to have the tough stuff 100 years from now, 200 years from now. And we don't want that. And so what I'm taking away from this meeting is just, believe it or not, despite all of that, is hope and optimism and excitement about this next phase. The idea of getting to regulatory response and making it impactful and working the kinks out and trying things that won't work, but learning from them. That's the good stuff. And I appreciate the comments that California has an opportunity here to lead. And we take that very much to heart, and we will use that. As one of our staff members often says, the small of our backs, as a hand in the small of our backs to keep us moving forward. And so thank you for your service, for bringing all of the wisdom that you've brought. And I'm talking to Emma and Jack too, that really has helped us enter this next phase of the program. So with that, thank you.
Thank you very much. It just is such an important reminder of how important the work of this program is, that we're protecting children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Let's make it happen.
I'm sorry, I forgot. Because children and grandchildren, the other reason that this change is okay of having Carl leave is because he's hired well, but because you've seen what this staff is capable of. And even though I haven't even met some of them, which for me is very strange to see strange faces in SCP, incredible work. And I can assure you that incredible work will continue. The standard of excellence is, I won't say it's unparalleled, but it's damn good.
Very, very true. So now is the time where we're going to make the official passing of the chairs to Molly and Mike. And I just want to offer you a chance to say a couple words before we adjourn.
I will try and be quick. So thank you for the confidence in us to do this. When Carl and I spoke, I was taken aback. You know, I have greatly enjoyed the 10 years I've been on the panel, and I look forward to future years. The staff here is excellent. Molly and I had a chance. Kelly was saying how they make it easy for her. But as Carl and Meredith were saying, that is because Art and Kelly put a lot of extra effort into working with the staff. The staff comes to them with questions and they refine it. It is amazing over the last 10 years that I've been here to have seen Art and Kelly make this look as smooth and easy as they do. They have been an excellent team, an excellent resource for the department. And Molly and I are going to work very hard to try and live up to that, to live up to Carl's expectations of what this department and what the panel can provide to it. Meredith has been incredibly supportive, and that has been wonderful. We look forward to working with you. There's absolute faith in the three of you to keep this going. And we will be, I'm sure, talking a lot, but you know, just thanks to the panel for also all the support we've gotten this last couple of days after it's been announced. You guys are great to work with. You're, you know, and I've said this before, but you always make me feel so stupid because you're so brilliant. And it's feeling stupid in a great way. So thanks to everyone here, and looking forward to the future. And again, you know, thanks to you.
Yeah. Yes, we have very big shoes to fill, and but we have models to run with, and we're grateful for that. And I'm grateful that Mike has spent more time on this panel than I am generally more of a newcomer, but passionate about what the program is doing. And so it's just an honor to be asked to, you know, to help lead this panel going forward. And easier not to do, as Mike said, just having shadowed Kelly in the preparation for this meeting. All the tremendous preparation that goes into it. It's a day-and-a-half meeting, but I'm sure there's weeks of preparation for this. So it makes these conversations robust and rich, and it's a joy to be a part of it. And I've been wanting to say this, but yes, SCP rocks, and we will rock on. So Carl, I heard, is a musician at heart, and so I think we're gonna have to, you know, have some extramural activities to go see some playing, to go see some music or whatever. But it's been such a gift to work with Carl, and I'm not going to go into this because I will tear up. We'll leave that to later, but thank you to all. It's going to be such a pleasure to continue to work in this space and to have a reason to be working more closely with my colleagues at DTSC, because I have deep respect for them and deep respect for this program. So thank you.
So thank you all. It's time for us all to move into the future. This meeting is adjourned.